Hey everybody, Mr. Wallowitz here. So we are moving on now from the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The Constitution is ratified by the states, by the required 9 states, but eventually all 13 do ratify the Constitution. As a way to help those states ratify the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were also ratified. To help gain ratification for the Constitution, the nation's capital was moved from Philadelphia to a tract of land in between Virginia and Maryland. It is not a state. It is not a part of any state. It is federal land. The name of that land, the name of that city would eventually become Washington. The name of that land would eventually become the District of Columbia. So that's why we have Washington, D.C. And speaking of Washington, he is going to take office as the first elected president. He is the first and only so far to be unanimously elected president by the Electoral College. Now, what does this mean? Let's introduce George Washington's administration. So some vocabulary terms for us to know as we go forward with this. First, we have precedent, an earlier event or action that is regarded as an example or guide to be considered in subsequent similar circumstances. And President's Cabinet. The Cabinet of the United States is composed of the most senior appointed officers of the executive branch of the federal government of the United States, who are generally the heads of the federal executive departments. So President's precedence. George Washington's presidency is filled with many firsts. As the first president, he needed to establish what it meant to be president. Everything Washington did was going to be analyzed, and he knew it. And every act as president was modeled after Washington's own style of leadership. So what does it mean to be president? There is no example from the Articles of Confederation. There was no president at the time. So everything that Washington did, he knew that it was going to be analyzed. He was going to have to set an example for future presidents. So he needed to find a way to model what the president was actually going to do. And so what he did was he modeled his own leadership style into the president. When Washington was the commanding general of the Continental Army, he had a council of generals, and he would get their opinions on what to do next before he made the final decision. So he says, well, why can't I do that as president? It doesn't say anywhere in the Constitution that he can't do that as in Article 2 as the head of the executive branch. So he's going to form a council of people who are going to advise him and give him information before he makes the final decision. I'm going to call it his cabinet. So what is the cabinet? The president's cabinet is composed of appointed officers of departments of the executive branch of the federal government of the United States. They help the president make decisions by giving their advice during a situation. So George Washington knows that he is not an expert on everything. He does not know everything about everything and needs help in certain areas. His original cabinet is composed of the Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of War, and an Attorney General. He is going to seek information from these departments in how to lead the country, how to establish his policy, and what is the best way of doing that. So how are the members of the cabinet selected? Cabinet officers are nominated by the president and confirmed by the U.S. Senate by majority vote. Each official receives the title of secretary, except the attorney general, who leads the Department of Justice. Cabinet members serve at the pleasure of the president and may be dismissed at any time. Cabinet members are not elected officials, so they can be hired and fired at the will of the president. If the president feels that a cabinet member is not doing what is best for the country and for his administration, the president will replace them with somebody who will carry out the ideas and the agenda of the president. So here is Washington's first cabinet. Look at these little handsome devils. So we have the Secretary of State. Thomas Jefferson was selected as the first Secretary of State. Secretary of State carries out the president's foreign policies through the State Department and the Foreign Service of the United States. So the Secretary of State is going to travel around the world establishing foreign policy, letting other countries know where the United States stands on certain issues. Thomas Jefferson was picked because during the Articles of Confederation, he was appointed minister to France and would deal with France in helping to strengthen the alliance, to help France get involved in the American Revolutionary War, to help us beat Great Britain during the Revolution. So he is a well-traveled man and is selected by George Washington to help give him advice on where the United States should stand in the world. Where is our world standing? So with that knowledge for being Minister to France, being successful in that, he is selected as the first Secretary of State. Secretary of War. Henry Knox was selected as the first Secretary of War. The Secretary of War is in charge of all spending for the support and transportation of the armed forces. Now, this is an area where Washington does know well, as he was a very high-ranking officer in the British Army during the French and Indian War, works his way up to general, becomes the commanding officer, the top guy in the Continental Army during the American Revolutionary War against Great Britain. So this is an area that Washington knows fairly well. However, because he is president and can't focus his attention 100% on certain specific issues, still decides that there is a need for a Secretary of War. And Henry Knox, who is basically his second in charge during the American Revolution, was a top pick to be Secretary of War. Henry Knox will advise the president on the standing of the army, where supplies are, how are we going to get our military from one place to another, how are we going to equip them, and so on, especially in its infancy. It has evolved now that the Secretary of War, or the War Department, does not exist anymore and has since been replaced with the Defense Department at the Pentagon. We have now a Secretary of Defense, not a Secretary of War. But Henry Knox would lead, advise the president what to do, and then Washington would make decisions from there. Secretary of the Treasury. Alexander Hamilton was the first Secretary of the Treasury. The Treasury Department is the agency responsible for promoting economic prosperity, ensuring the financial security of the United States. Treasury Department is responsible for a wide range of activities, such as advising the president on economic and financial issues, encouraging sustainable economic growth, and fostering improved governance in financial institutions. What do we do with our money? How do we spend it? What is the best way to organize our economic spending? How are we going to collect revenue? So on and so forth. Those things are done by or advised by the Secretary of the Treasury. The Treasury Department is responsible for carrying out those actions as laid forth by the Secretary and by the President. Alexander Hamilton was George Washington's right-hand man during the Revolution, very familiar with each other. But Hamilton is going to have some radical views on how the Treasury Department should operate. And Hamilton, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit later on in our studies in this unit, how Hamilton and Jefferson are going to butt heads a lot in their views politically. But Hamilton is tasked with organizing the United States debt. How is best to collect revenue to help pay off that debt from a very expensive Revolutionary War. Attorney General. Edmund Randolph was the first Attorney General. The Attorney General represents the U.S. in legal matters. The Attorney General makes recommendations to the President regarding appointments of federal judges and to other positions within the department. So the Attorney General is basically the top law enforcement officer in the United States. Usually a top lawyer who will advise the president in how the United States should operate through legal matters. The Attorney General will recommend people to become judges within the federal government when a seat on the Supreme Court becomes vacant. The Attorney General will help the president um, come up with nominees or potential nominees to fill those seats within the federal government court system. The Attorney General and the Department of Justice will provide recommendations to the president on who to appoint. The Department of Justice is supposed to operate, though, independently from the federal government. It is also tasked with investigating issues within the federal government. So the president and the attorney general should be on the same side, but the attorney general shouldn't hesitate if the president or anybody within the president's administration needs to be investigated too. So the Department of Justice over the years has become a more and more independent branch of the executive branch, and is trying to be as fair as possible, be as unbiased as possible when investigations or any type of controversy comes up during a president's administration. Well, there you have it. There is an assignment for you to complete on Google Classroom. So you will be instructed to go there to help answer the questions on the Google Doc. Use this Google Slides to help you answer those questions. All right, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.